Episode 20 with Teresa Kemp. Thanks for tuning in today, listeners, to the first podcast of 2016. Welcome to the new year. Today's podcast, I bring you a guest who is the founder of a ministry called Breaking Chains International. Teresa Kemp is an ordained minister. She graduated with a bachelor's in psychology from Florida Southern College, and she's also a published author. Her story is incredible. Remarkable almost that from the time she was born, she almost really wasn't even given a chance at life. Or I should say, chance at quality life. She was abused from a young age, got involved in drugs and alcohol, again at an early age. You would think that she either should have been dead by now or should have just been locked up for life. However, she's gone through a series of miraculous changes. She had an incredible encounter with God, which she's going to tell you about in this testimony. Also want to take a moment and just thank everybody who's been listening on neverforsakenpodcast.com, reaching out on Facebook, on Twitter. I just Googled Never Forsaken Podcast this morning, and the website came up on some sites I never even heard of. People just reposting, and so I thank everyone for sharing the site, for your likes, for your comments. Feel free to keep the communication coming. I love to hear from you. I love to hear from people in other countries about how this podcast has maybe impacted you or opened your mind about something. And also, if you want to help to sponsor the show, you can go to patreon.com/neverforsakenpodcast. I have the links up on all social media and on the website. You could just pledge $1, $2, $5 a month or whatever, just to help alleviate some of the costs of producing the show and to bring you better guests and better content. Thanks again for listening. Episode 20 with Teresa Kemp. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Never Forsaken Podcast, looking at the lives of the outcasts, the seekers, the never forsakens, those in or out of the local church and passionate about Christ. The show is broadcast weekly, and show notes and more information can be found at neverforsakenpodcast.com. I'm your host, John Robinson. Let's get into the show.
Thank you, John. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
Great to have you, Teresa. So, Teresa, you have a very powerful testimony that I would love for you to share with our listeners. In just speaking with different people, I've met a lot of people that have had similar backgrounds in varying degrees, and I think that your testimony could definitely speak to a lot of people. So I'll just let you begin.
Well, I love the testimony that the Lord has given me. I mean, it is powerful. I'm reminded every day. I look in the mirror and say, who are you? Because it's amazing. If it wasn't for mugshots, I would say that I was speaking the truth. I remember when I started to write my book, I actually looked at one of the mugshots, and I had to make sure that that was actually me, my Social Security number, my birth date, and because the picture looks so different. And but that's the transforming power of God. I was a drug addict and an alcoholic for 18 years of my life. I think I started drugs around maybe 15, 16. And I always tell people nobody grows up to have a dream, and tell their parents, hey, I want to be a drug addict and go to prison and hurt a lot of people and hurt myself. I mean, that wasn't my dream as a child, of course. I was abused as a child. I don't use that as an excuse, but from the very beginning, at the age 4 or 5, something got broken in me. And probably the biggest thing was just a constant shame, feeling like not that everything I was doing was wrong, but that I was wrong. I was defective in some way. And so I searched my whole life trying to find anything that could fill that void, that great void I was feeling, and plus the brokenness from the abuse. But I started, drugs was one of the scenes that I seemed to fit in. I always tried to be different, and so to get high on LSD, to hallucinate, to get high, and you felt like a different person. It was just right up my alley. So, it didn't start out as an addiction. I was just abusing drugs. But progressively, it started with pot, and then it just kept increasing over the years until I was an IV user with meth, I was arrested. I smoked crack cocaine. I was arrested 7 times. My parents tried everything to help me. My mother prayed for 18 years, hoping that her daughter would change, and she did see that prayer. But the last time I was arrested was April 16th, 1997, and I was looking at 40 years in prison. I remember that I was so far into the pit that I actually didn't know my name, and going to the pit, going to hell was not a problem for me. In fact, I was embracing it because I just wanted to get out from where I was. The day I was arrested, I didn't know my name.
So at this point now, this is your, I forget the number, however many arrests you said, but you're looking at 40 years. And so now you feel at this point completely hopeless. And now, could you touch on a little bit, if up until this time, did you have any religious or spiritual background at all?
When I was a little girl, my mother was my Sunday school teacher. I remember, maybe about 4 or 5 going to church with her, and that was about the only religion I had. Because of the abuse, I was actually mad at God. If there was actually a God, I was mad at him for even creating me, because I couldn't figure out why in the world did he create me to allow me to get abused. And I was actually mad at him for even making me. And so, because I became very, very angry.
Mm-hmm.
But we moved away from the city where my mother was involved with church. And after moving away, I think I was like in the, I think we moved to the country. I was in about the 3rd grade. And when we moved there, there was no more church. So that was pretty much, I didn't think God wanted anything to do with me. And at that time, growing up, I didn't want anything to do with God either. So I propelled myself into sports. Academics wasn't so great. I didn't really care about school. I didn't fit in anywhere. And then that's when I started doing drugs. So about the age of 16.
Right. So that starts to kind of fill the void, although it doesn't in reality fill the void, but that's what you turned to and reached out to for that. I'll call it's a form of spirituality. So you're kind of reaching out for that form of spirituality for a while, but obviously we see where that got you. So now you're looking at this prison time, and what your thoughts at that time are just to embrace it. And I guess, you were ready to do the time, or what was going through your mind at this time?
Well, when I was arrested the last time, the first couple of times you're just angry, you're scared, you make all these promises, hey, I'll never do it again, and your parents bond you out, and but then you just go back into the same old game. I wasn't interested in trying to change or anything. But the last time I was arrested, I was so physically bad and so emotionally bad. I was full-blown addiction where the drug became my boss, and whatever that boss told me to do, I did it. I went so far into a hole. I mean, I had no more conscience. I could steal anything, and I wouldn't even think twice about it. I just became an awful, awful person. The Bible talks about in 1 Corinthians 6:9-10, I believe, or verse 11. It talks about everything that will not inherit the kingdom of God. And I became every one of those things. And I was just so miserable in myself. And by that time, before I was arrested, my mother finally, bless her heart, she was doing what any loving mother does, is expecting the best, that maybe today is the day that her daughter is going to change her behavior. but it's something you can't do. I always tell people you don't need willpower. It's the willpower that got you in trouble. What I needed was God power to get me out of trouble. And so long story short, my mother finally got tired of me. I had all these warrants. I had police officers coming to her house looking for me because they finally kicked me out. I came home one time very, very high, messed up, warrants, about 16 warrants in the county I was at, plus federal charges. And I came home completely messed up, and my mother had my baby picture in her hand, and she looked right at me. And she said, you are not welcomed here. My
Wow.
daughter's welcomed, but you're not welcomed here. I don't know who you are, and you're not welcomed here. She said, don't you ever come back here again. And she tore my baby picture in half.
Wow.
And she was my last lifeline to anybody to manipulate or to try to control or try to help me out of the mess that the hole that I dug. And so she was my last resort. And that's when I left. I ran away into another county trying to avoid being caught by the police. And I spiraled down. Probably in the matter of 4 months, I hit the bottomest that you could be, if that's a word. I was really, really, really bad. And the day that I was arrested, April 16th, 1997, the partner in crime that was with me, she literally said, somebody's dying today, and it's not me, it's you.
Wow.
You could smell death. I knew I was dying. I literally had what I know now were demons literally coming around me and looking at me like just waiting to take me. And so when the police officer came, it was a fluke that he arrested me. And I don't want to tell too much because I'm hoping and praying that people will read the book, because if God can change me, he can change anybody.
Right.
If it doesn't matter what pit you're in. It might be addiction. It might be depression. It might be self-righteousness and religion, because that's a pit in itself. No matter what pit you're in or how far you think that you're gone, he can resurrect you. And that's what it was all a plan here. And my mother, that day when I was arrested, she actually contacted, she didn't know what was happening with me. She had no contact with me, but in the spirit, she knew something was really, really, really wrong. And she started praying, and she actually contacted my sister and my niece and said, you better pray for her because something's really, really wrong. And she was right. I was about ready to die. And my sister and my niece actually couldn't even pray because they thought I was already dead.
Wow.
And so I got arrested on a fluke. I was in a stolen truck, and I was parked at a gas station very, very high. And a police officer came. He didn't know that the truck was stolen, but he came and he said he was pulling me over because I was driving without a seatbelt, but I wasn't driving. So it was just wild. And when I got out of the car, he asked me what my name was, and I couldn't tell him. I had no idea what my name was. And he ended up arresting me. And to be honest with you, I was acting like I was upset, but I was actually, finally it was over. I was relieved. And I didn't know I was looking at 40 years in prison until after I did get arrested. And they came and told me that you're looking at 40 years in prison. And I remember I had almost like a nervous breakdown. I started like hysterically laughing and couldn't stop. And they took me back to my cell until somebody shook me and said, snap out of it. And but it wasn't long after that in July, my mother finally took a phone call. And what brought me to my knees, I went to church in the jail, but I wasn't going for Jesus. I didn't think he wanted anything to do with me.
Right. Was it just more somewhere to go, something else to do at that point?
Yeah, it was, and my partner in crime was arrested at the same time, so she was in a different cell. And so we went to the church service to write notes, to talk, to try to figure out how we could bond out, how we could get out. We actually wouldn't tell them who we were, so they knew us as, Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. And it sounds like Thelma and Louise, actually, but it's really a true story. And again, writing this book, I was like, had to relive everything. And I was like, wow, did this really happen?
Yeah, I'm sure that wasn't
so
easy.
Different. No, it was really, I went through a whole new healing process even writing the book, because I had to start from the very beginning, from the abuse all the way up to 18 years of just really, what happened to me, 18 years of abuse and hating myself and hating God and hating everybody. But I love the way God wrote this book, because I don't glorify the devil in any way. I hate that. There's nothing worse than sharing your testimony, and it's more about the moanings than about the victory. And I love the way the Lord wrote this book, because He actually wrote this book. And so you have something that might be just so tragic, but there's always right behind it. What I love, what He did was show the victory, how He came in. And,
right.
And that's what happened with me. We were going to the church services to just figure out a way to get out before they know our real names. And, which that didn't work. They caught us. And thank God they did. But, while we were in the church service, we were talking so much and so disrespectful. The chaplain of that jail told us to be quiet, and I thought, "Wow, what kind of Christian are you to tell me to shut up?"
Right.
But I was just so rude, and but we did, because she was going to separate us, and so we were passing notes. But at that time, I started hearing this Jesus about Jesus, and a different Jesus that I knew as a little girl. It wasn't just little nursery rhymes. It was really, He died for you. He loves you. He can help you. And I was thinking to myself, how can He love me when I've done nothing but turn my back against Him?
Yeah.
And I was like, is this really real? I mean, and something started happening in my heart. And even though I was still writing notes, the Holy Spirit was really starting to work on me. And I was like, could this be real? I mean, is this lady smoking some bad dope or what? Because I was like, this can't be right. This can't be right. How can He love me? I don't love Him. I don't even really believe in Him. And I don't like Him. I'm still mad at Him. And but then all of a sudden I'm hearing this different Jesus. About love, and He didn't come to condemn me. He came to save me and set me free. And so I went back to my cell one day, and my mother finally answered the phone, and she told me that when she answered the phone, I could tell something was really, really wrong. And she told me that my sister, who I love so much, was dying. She had juvenile diabetes. And when I hung up the phone, I know now what it was, but a complete godly sorrow came upon me. And at that one time, I started seeing myself for who I really became. And I was so broken. It broke every part of me. And there was the guilt and the shame. And I don't want to be like this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I started hearing that voice, He'll forgive you. He loves you. And He can change things for you. And I was like, I knew my sister was going to heaven, and I had enough sense I was going to hell. I don't know where I got that from, but I knew I was going to hell because I sure was acting like hell.
Yeah.
And I looked like hell, I acted like hell, and I smelled like hell. And so I didn't want to be separated from her. And so July 20th, 1997, I went into the church service with a different purpose this time. And I was like, I'm going to do what those people do and raise my hands and say that prayer that I received Jesus.
That's pretty awesome.
And so I went into the chapel, and I could not wait until she shut up. I was like, please be quiet. I want to lift my hand out, she told me later, we're very good friends, Chaplain Westmoreland. I still remember her after 19 years, and we still communicate. And I'll never forget her. You always remember the person that introduced you to the love of your life. And she told me later, she said, when you lifted your hand, I about dropped my guitar because you were the last person I thought was going to get saved.
That's crazy.
And I remember it distinctly, John. It was July 20th, 1997 at 9:30 in the morning. I can tell you how green the grass was. I can tell you the dew on the grass in the small window they had in the chapel with wires across it. I was sitting in probably about the third pew back and closer to the window. And I can tell you everything that happened that day because for the first time in my life, I became alive. For 36 years of my life, and 18 of those, I was like a Walking Dead person. I was in a coma, and but that day I came out of my coma, and I've never felt so much life in my life. And I didn't give my life for the Lord. I didn't give it to meet Jesus. I really gave my life so that I could go to heaven. But something happened to me. And instead of going back to the cell and fighting and cussing and acting like hell, the first thing I said when I walked back into my cell was, "Who's got a Bible?" And everybody looked at me and went, "What happened to you?" And I started reading and reading and reading, and then 3 days later, my sister died.
Wow!
And that's when I had an encounter with the living God. And I hurt so bad when they came and told me, and I'll never forget that day either. Anyway, that's when they moved me into a Christian dorm, and that's when I had an encounter with the living God that forever changed me. And literally, when they told me my sister died, they took me immediately from the cell I was and put me in a Christian dorm, and I cried out to God, and I said, if you're really real, like you say that you are, and like they say. I remember I looked off the balcony, because it was 2 stories, to see if it was high enough for me to kill myself because I hurt so bad. There wasn't one part of my body that did not hurt emotionally. And I said, if you're really real, either kill me or touch me, but I can't be like this anymore. That time, John, it was like a wind that came. It came actually from my right, and I even almost felt like my uniform went up. And I don't know how to explain it except in John 3, where Jesus said, you must be reborn again. And Nicodemus said, how is that possible? And he said, well, you don't know where the wind comes, but it still comes. You don't know where it comes from, but that's the way the Spirit of God is. And literally, he was like a wind. And from my toes up, I started feeling this joy and peace and love that I've never felt in my life. I mean, I paid a lot of money to get high, and I spent years chasing after the best high, but nothing compared to what was happening to me. And I remember I gasped. I mean, I literally went, you really are alive. And at that very moment, I told him, from this day forth, I'll serve you all the days of my life. And that was 19 years ago. He instantly took every facial tic from me, all drug addiction, completely left my body. I had no desire for drugs anymore or alcohol, no desire for cigarettes. I mean, literally, I was lit up with God, and people would not even get around me. I was looking in the mirror going, who are you? Because I had changed so quickly. No, I mean, it freaked me out. I was like, wow, what is happening to me? And I went into the chapel the next day, actually, and the people in the chapel and even my partner in crime, they literally gasped when they saw me and said, you got touched by God. And it was obvious. And instantly, he completely set me free. Literally had tics from doing the drugs for so long, facial tics, and they completely stopped instantly. And I would purposely try to think about drugs or alcohol and I couldn't do it. To this day, I can't do it. I was trying to even think how I used to think, and it was completely gone. And it's just a miracle from God. Other things in my life didn't come that drastic, but with him, he knew he had to do something drastically for me because I was almost dead. And in desperation, the more desperate you are, the more broken you are, is when he really, 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 really shows up. And now I know, he's so full of love. He had every right to turn from me. He had every right not to come to me. He had every right to completely tell me, no, you've gone too far. You've broken every commandment I ever made in the Bible. You've done everything that I'm completely against. But he didn't do that. In fact, he looked right in my face and said, "You're the one I've been waiting for."
That's powerful.
It's beautiful. It's so wonderful. He's not like what everybody makes him out to be. He's not angry at us. He loves us, and he cares about us. And after he touched me that day, John, I could not stay out of the Word. I literally would fall asleep on my Bible because I had to find out, who are you? I want more of you. I want to know you more. And so, I'm on every day of my life from that day has just been finding out more about him. And, but he loves us and he cares about us. And I guess I've talked enough. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. And, when the Lord asked me to write this book, I'm a college graduate. Obviously, I didn't do 40 years in prison, or you would be talking to me on a prison phone right now.
Right. Well, that's why I didn't want to get into all the details of how you got out and whatnot, but I do know that you got into working some prison ministry and whatnot. But I did want to ask you about going back to college, and when I look through your pictures on Facebook, and you've got a lot of missionary pictures and whatnot. So if you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's really cool. I got out in 2000. I, didn't have to do 40 years in prison. I did 3, a year and a half in state and a year and a half in federal. And so I always tell people I didn't go to prison. I went to Bible school with a good security system. So while I was there, I purposed in my heart to the way I came in is not the way I'm going to go out. So I got out in 2000, and I started going to college. The Lord had me go into a community college to build my confidence, and then he wanted me to finish my 4-year degree. So I did get my bachelor's degree in psychology, which I didn't understand why the Lord wanted me to do that. But after, in 2011, I believe it was, the Lord started prompting me to write a book, and I think that's why he wanted me to have the degree in psychology.
Sure.
But my heart was always ministry, and I was working, going to school, but then the Lord called me into ministry, and I started doing prison and jail ministry. I've been involved in that for over 13 years now. And I first was a house mother. I helped build a home for women coming out of prison. And I was there for about a year, and then I went in as a coordinator where I ran a 25-bed facility for women coming out of prison. I was with them for 9 years, but I had such a desire for the nations. And Joyce Meyer Ministries is one of my heroes, because it was Joyce Meyer Ministry and Kenneth Copeland Ministries were the only ministries that I could write to in prison, and they would send you free literature and things to help you in your walk with the Lord. I love people that don't forget the prisoners, because that's God's heart. And so they helped me so much. So I always dreamed about one day meeting Joyce, and I got to. In fact, when I was released from prison, I got to meet her and tell her thank you face to face for all the things that they did for me while I was there. But in 2010, I decided I I wanted to go to the nation so bad, and I never got an opportunity. And so on a fluke, I applied to go on the Hand of Hope medical missions, even though I really didn't have too much medical background. And they accepted me. And so in 2010, my first place was Africa, and that was my heart. So since 2010, I have been to Africa now 11 times.
Oh, wow.
And God supernaturally provides for each one of the trips. And then in 2011, God prompted me to start my own ministry called Breaking Chains International. And I do prison ministry all over the state of Florida. I'll go into any jail, anywhere in the country, and also in the world. And I started doing prison ministry in Uganda also. And now I just want to reach more people, not just the people in prison behind bars, but in anybody that's in prison. And so the Lord prompted me to write a book. And I was like, God, I know I'm a college graduate, but I don't speak English.
Right.
I speak, I hardly can even spell. I'm like, God, are you sure? And I said, Lord, I don't want to write this story. And I said, you're asking me to expose everything to the world. And the Lord was very gracious to me, and he said, Teresa, I bought this story. It's not yours anymore.
That's a good point.
And when he said that, I was like, well, I can't argue. So I said, I remember, John, I went into Books A Million, and I literally started crying because I was like, Lord, look at all these books, and people have something to say. And I said, Lord, I don't want to just write a book. If you don't write it and people's lives are not changed, then I don't want to do it. And I can literally say he wrote this book. It has been one miracle after another. I told the Lord, I said, Joyce Myers goes off to the mountains to write books. And I said, it'd be really cool if I could go off to the mountain to write this book, if you really want me to write this book. And 2 days later, I went into my church, and this lady at my church came up and said, how's your book coming? And I said, it's not. And she said, well, my husband and I were praying, and we have a cabin in the North Carolina mountains that we want to give to you to go write your book.
Wow.
And I went, shut up.
Right.
And she was like, excuse me? And I said, no, really, shut up. You've got to be kidding me. I was like, I don't want to write this book, but it was the Lord. And I said, Lord, I don't have the money to go. I'm not joking. 2 days later, a huge offering came into the ministry, and I called the lady, and I said, do you mind if I use a portion of this for going to North Carolina? And she said, no, as long as I get the first copy. And she did.
That's awesome.
Copy signed. So the Lord really did it. I was there for about 3 weeks and wrote 7 chapters. And I just allowed every day, I just woke up and allowed the Holy Spirit to write it. And then I really believe it's God-breathed, God-written. It's a miracle. It's called Forever Changed, a story of God's transforming power. And because of Africa and seeing all the suffering in Africa, I told the Lord, I said, this is your story. You wrote the book. You set me free. So I believe that you should get 90% of the proceeds, and I'll keep 10.
Well, that's very generous. So where's the best place for people to be able to pick up the book?
Well, I don't have it in all the bookstores as of yet. I went through self-publishing, basically. But if they order it on my website, which is foreverchangebook.com or breakingchainsint.org, all the proceeds stay in the ministry, and I get it out even faster than Amazon. So
that's great. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Teresa, I'm definitely going to, I'll put that information up, and we'll direct people towards that and towards your ministries. And what are your future plans with the ministry? You're going to be going back to Africa anytime soon?
I pray so. I just came back from Zambia, and we went to regions that were actually had never heard the gospel before. So we had about 1,700 people that we preached to, and
Wow.
1,600 people gave their life to the Lord. They're in great need in Zambia. I love the country and I love the people, and so I've been asked to come back in April. But I'll go to Africa anytime, any place. So I absolutely love Africa, and my heart is to get the book out because I believe that it's a perfect time in where we are in society that people need to hear that it's not true once an addict, always an addict, because who the Son sets free is free indeed. And, drug addiction is rampant. And to me, that's just complete identity theft because we're made in the image of God and in His likeness. And God didn't make us flawed. He made us fabulous. My heart is to really get the book out and to help people and to go into every prison and byways and just get people saved and show the love of God to people like it was shown to me. So,
well, that sounds great, Teresa. Definitely going to get that information out, and best of luck in your ministry and your travels, and just look forward to following you and seeing the great things that God's doing in your life.
Thank you, John. You're a blessing. That was a great honor, and I hope I did okay.
You were fine.
Wonderful, John. Thank you,
All right.
sir. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Teresa. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.